Hi, it's Jules Vandermut here from Clinical EFT Connect, doing another one of my interviews for the series called Pep Talks with Jules, which stands for Passionate Everyday People. And this is just a series of interviews with people who've been clients or mentees or people who've trained in EFT with me. And we're just doing this to share information with other people about the benefits of EFT. So I'd like to welcome Bruno Sade, who is an advanced EFT practitioner on the team at Clinical EFT Connect, and he's also a psychologist. So welcome, Bruno.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So what would you say? I mean, I know there would be many things that you would say that you use EFT for or that EFT has helped you with. But what would be the main things you would put forward as EFT having helped you with?
Yeah, there are a few that come to mind. One of them, I think the one that has made the most difference, at least in my maybe everyday life, has to do with the like fear of judgment of other people, or like worrying too much about what other people think, which is like maybe like an element of social anxiety. And it's actually like one of my favorite ways of applying EFT nowadays, whether with clients or on myself, which is to whenever I'm concerned about someone, I don't know, like maybe for example, I might have a new client who is new to EFT, and we're gonna have a first tapping session, and I'm kind of worried, like, are they gonna enjoy the session or find it beneficial? Did I do enough psychoeducation, enough, explanation? Did I forget anything, etc.? So I might like tap imagining the other person feeling disappointed about, about the session, about myself. Or maybe it's like a social situation, I don't know, a birthday party, something along those lines, where for whatever reason I might feel like I embarrassed myself in some way. I made a fool of myself, or I said the wrong thing, etc. So I find it very useful afterwards, like once I'm home, by myself, to tap on what other people might have thought about me. And I notice that I tend to find relief really quickly nowadays. In the past, like many years ago, 10 years ago or more, that I knew about EFT, but obviously not to the depth I know about it now, I would try to tap in the moment. And that usually didn't work very well because on the one hand, it looked weird to be tapping in front of other people. But also because like in the moment when it's like, I don't want to be feeling this way, in my experience, it doesn't work as well as when I simply allow myself to acknowledge what it is that I'm thinking and feeling about something, which when I'm by myself, it's easier to do. So that has been one of the main things it has helped me with. And also like to mention the difference between, let's say, a more traditional approach, something more like, let's say, cognitive behavioral therapy kind of approach, which is something that I have also tried and, also helps to some degree. For example, years ago, I came across this idea that, suffering is trying to control the uncontrollable. For example, what other people think about us, right? And, whenever I would find myself being too worried about, being judged by other people or something like that, I would try to like convince myself, suffering is trying to control the uncontrollable. It's not up to me, um, and to some degree it worked a little bit, but it's like my body was like, yeah, I'm not buying that. It doesn't feel true. And I think that EFT does a great job in terms of like working with the body sensations and also the physical act of tapping. There's something about that which is like speaking what feels true, what actually feels true in this moment, which usually changes as we start tapping. So I also wanted to mention that difference between what one might call a top-down approach, which is through our thoughts, trying to change how we feel, trying to think our way out of anxiety or fear or shame, embarrassment, etc., versus EFT, which I think combines a top-down approach, but also a bottom-up in terms of, yeah, how am I actually feeling in my body when thinking about this?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's good to hear someone who's trained in both and who has experienced both cognitive behavioral therapy as well as EFT, because, you know, you can give a really informed perspective on that. And so were there other things that you wanted to mention that you find EFT has been helpful
Yeah.
to you?
Yes. And just to clarify, I'm not like, as a psychologist, I was mostly trained in psychoanalysis, but I am still familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy from things I've read, you know, on my own and things like that. But yes, the other thing I wanted to mention is the fear of driving. I used to have, you know, I first took my driving exam when I was 18 years old. So I had taken a few lessons. In the lessons, I felt, you know, relatively calm, like I felt like I was learning well. But then when the time for the exam came, it turns out I hadn't been properly taught, you know, how to do reverse or how to do parking. Like the instructor left that for the last lesson and didn't give enough time for that. So when I had to do the exam, I failed the exam. And it's like ever since failing the exam, even though at the time I did try tapping on it and things like that, it's like it left me with a sense of, for many years, of like, yeah, I'm simply not good at driving, or even like something deeper also related to other areas of my life. Like I might be good with theory, like, yeah, sure, I can learn the driving rules and laws and what each sign might mean, etc. But in terms of the actual practice, I'm not so good with experience or practice. And so like for many years, I had a fear of driving. Maybe I would drive a little bit with my dad, you know, sitting next to me. But still, you know, it is true the traditional approach, which is do exposure, like the more you drive, the more confident you're gonna become. It is true to some degree, but in my case, it was such like the inner resistance to driving and like the fear that I'm gonna make a mistake, damage the car, etc., that I found it very difficult to actually get that exposure. So maybe I would tap like once a year when I would come to visit my parents, you know, on vacation. And it's like I never got enough practice to get that, you know, what everyone says, that eventually things become more automatic or second nature. Like you don't need to think about shifting gears and looking at the mirrors, etc. So I had that fear for many years. And finally, I think around 3 years ago, I started tapping on it more diligently, like coming up with specific scenarios in my mind, like, you know, imagining I'm driving and I have like a huge truck or bus behind me and I'm intimidated by that, or and tapping also on the memories of every time when I was kind of gaining confidence, but then I would make some kind of mistake that would like diminish my confidence, you know, all of a sudden. Like, oh, you know, I cannot trust my senses, or look at how bad I was trying to park, and I fortunately I never had like any serious accident, but yeah, it's like whenever I was like slowly building my confidence through like exposure and courage, something would happen that would drain that confidence away. And I also had to tap on the memory of failing the exam and things like that. And eventually I was able to start driving by myself. Um, and again, I think it's still a work in progress, because like honestly, I don't, if it's like a known, like, you know, going from where I live to my parents' house, that I go there like once a week, it's a road that I'm used to, so I feel quite comfortable with that. I'm quite confident with that. If it's like a new place that I've never driven to before, then yeah, like that brings up some anxiety. Recently, I had to tap, like I did some lots of tapping with you, I remember, on I started parking my car instead of on the street, in my building's garage, which was like a very tricky garage the way it was designed, because it's very narrow and you have to avoid a column, and it's like going up, and you also have to like make a turn. So it had several elements, and also like the gate would only be open for like 30 seconds, so you couldn't take too long. So like several anxiety provoking elements. And you know, I went from feeling like there's no way I can ever do this. I simply cannot imagine myself ever being able to drive out of my garage. And you know, by tapping enough on it, it wasn't like a one session wonder or a one session result. Eventually, I was able to start driving out of my garage. Oh, there's my my dog on the background.
So Gina,
Yes. And yes, so that was I think that was also like evidence. You know, I was also motivated in tackling that particular fear of driving out of my garage, because it was like this would every now and then it's like I sometimes forget like what did EFT actually help me with? Like sometimes I actually forget, you know, I think that happens to many people. So this was like a very tangible thing that is like there's no way I can imagine myself ever doing that, and by tapping on it, and also like researching like strategies, like asking my girlfriend, how is it that you drive out, what references do you have, etc.
yeah,
So that was something that also helped. And then something else that recently EFT has helped me with has to do with um, taking up a hobby that I used to have a few years ago, which is singing. You know, as an amateur, I wouldn't consider myself someone born with singing talent or musical talent, but slowly I have definitely been getting better. And I had stopped singing maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, right before the pandemic. And I was, in recent years, after becoming an EFT practitioner and having a bit of free time, I was kind of like wanting to start this hobby again, but I was feeling kind of discouraged because whenever I would try to sing, it's like, oh, my voice, I feel like I've lost whatever high notes I had gained in my practice. I've lost them. And whenever I would try to sing, it's like my voice would start like, or my vocal cords or throat would start hurting a little bit. And also like just the idea of like going to singing lessons was like, oh, I know that I felt like discouraged about doing it, like or like I can't be bothered, or it's gonna be anxiety provoking, I don't want to do it, etc. So I also did I tapped on that. I remember my first singing lesson in this city that I'm going to. These are group singing lessons, which means that we vocalize together as a group. We are maybe like, I don't know, 7, 8 students plus the teacher, and then we each take turns to sing individually. And so on my first lesson, when it came my turn to sing, I sang. Yeah, my voice was a bit shaky, but it was relatively okay. But then when the teacher started giving me her feedback, which was, like she wasn't being mean or anything, she was simply saying, pay attention to where you're placing your voice and things like that, and your breathing. And suddenly I started like trembling and shaking with anxiety. I didn't really know why, but it's like I suddenly felt somewhat out of control in a way. I don't even know if that was noticeable to other people, but it didn't feel comfortable at all. And also I noticed a lot of self-judgment, like, here I am, an EFT practitioner, a psychologist, and how come I'm feeling like this? This is so lame. And so I tapped on that afterwards, and also like imagining it would happen again, etc. And nowadays I'm totally okay singing. I'm not as charismatic singing as I would like. Like when I sing, I still don't know what to do with my hands, or I might be a bit stiff with my body. But I feel totally okay receiving feedback and when the teacher says, yeah, pay attention to your breathing, or open your mouth more, enunciate more, etc. It's like, yeah, sure, okay. I'll keep that in mind. And I also had to tap on, when I practice by myself, these sort of like limiting beliefs, like there's no way I can ever reach this high note, or there's no way I can ever surpass whatever like ceiling I had hit a few years ago when I was also taking singing lessons back then. And by tapping on that, I was able to overcome that ceiling. Obviously, there's still a lot of learning yet to do and improvement to make. But it's like nowadays, it's like I go to the classes, I sing. I've been able to diminish a lot of that sort of mental noise. Like, who do I think I am trying to sing? There's no way I can do this, etc., etc. So it's something that I really enjoy doing nowadays on my free time. So I found that EFT played a big role in that. Like, I think both increasing my enjoyment of, like working on the obstacles to enjoying singing more, and also my performance also, I think, improved. And it's not like a magical pill. It's not like suddenly I sing like Andrea Bocelli, or I would love to, but it has allowed me to make steady progress, and also to feel more neutral about the times when I'm not making progress or when I'm not noticing progress, because that would usually, like, I would feel disappointed or frustrated about that. But nowadays it's like, yeah, I simply know that if I keep at it consistently, eventually I'm gonna keep making progress. And so far, that's what's been happening.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I wanted to mention in terms of ways that EFT has improved my life has to do with my career as a psychologist. I think I would even say it has like rescued my career as a psychologist, in the sense that in university, in college, I was trained mostly in psychoanalysis, which is kind of like what we might call traditional talk therapy. And while I do think it does help some people, like it helps many people, so I'm definitely not against it. But at least in my case, trying to work as a psychoanalyst, I felt kind of ineffective. Like, I didn't really know how to help many of my clients. I mean, the first session, in a way, it's kind of similar to EFT. That, yes, like there is, people usually do find some benefit in talking to someone who is listening to them with compassion and non-judgment, and without, hopefully, allowing their own biases and prejudices, etc., to get in the way. So that's kind of like, I did find that part relatively easy. But then in terms of, okay, so after the first session, how do I actually help this person not be so affected by whatever triggers that they have or whatever issues they have? I felt very kind of disoriented or lost as to how to go about doing that. And psychoanalysts, at least those that I met or trained with together, they are aware that they obviously know about the subconscious mind's existence. They know that we cannot like think our way out of our issues, and they know that it's difficult just with like words alone or speaking alone to change less. But it's like you had to be like super smart and creative to be able to maybe like make some kind of joke to the client that would like super unique to that situation, that might like snap them out of a limiting belief, for example. But it felt, and then you would go to like supervise to get mentoring, for example, with one particular mentor or supervisor, and then you would go to another one and they would tell you completely different things about the same patient, because it was so like each case is unique, case by case, that I felt, at least as a psychoanalyst, I didn't feel very effective. Other people, I would say they might be, but I don't consider myself particularly skilled at psychoanalysis. So by contrast, I find EFT very, very elegant and simple in a way, because the way that I look at it is, I'm gonna help this person to simply be with whatever thoughts and feelings they actually have about a situation, like to give the microphone to those thoughts and feelings that in their everyday life they might not want to accept. This idea, what you resist persists. And by doing that, and allowing them to, or inviting them actually to speak what feels true for them in that moment, usually things start to shift, their emotions about a situation start to shift, their thoughts about a situation start to shift, usually in a more empowering and even objective direction. And in that way, and yes, like obviously, EFT doesn't necessarily protect us from all the bad, stressful things about life. But if we can at least change the meaning we might make of these bad things, or our reaction, our stress about it, to help our nervous system not be in survival mode so much, I think there's benefit to that. We also have more access to our creativity, how we might deal with the situation perhaps more effectively. So I think that in that sense, I feel very fortunate to have discovered EFT, to have found EFT, and I feel like I feel way more effective as a therapist, let's say, or as a practitioner than when I was doing traditional talk therapy.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. So those great examples, Bruno, because what I like that I'm hearing is that it's taken you a number of sessions over a period of time and quite a lot of consistency in applying the tool, both with other practitioners as well as on your own. And that's a realistic approach to take with an issue that's been long-standing, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare, the one session wonder thing, and it's just good to hear that even as practitioners, we have issues that we have to really chip away at, and you and I being swap partners like this.
Yeah.
Both of us over the years, many things we've really chipped away at, haven't we? And then finally a breakthrough happens. But yeah, it's just great to have it as a tool, isn't it? That you can use on yourself. You don't have to work with somebody else. You can help yourself with it, even if you're just learning it as a self-help tool.
Exactly. Yes. And even like I always find myself thinking about what EFT stands for, the letters, emotional freedom techniques. And, one might be tempted to think that emotional freedom means never ever feeling afraid, never ever feeling anxious about anything, never ever feeling angry about anything. And I think that, life is going to happen and we are going to be anxious about something. Hopefully, something I learned from you, which I love, is this sort of language, which is that these unpleasant emotional reactions that we might have about different things, as we gradually work on them with EFT, are going to become less frequent, less intense, and their duration is going to be shorter. And that's what I've noticed in my own life, and also what I notice in my clients' lives. That is not that, I'm never going to be anxious about anything again. But if there's like a repeated trigger that every time I have to speak in public, I feel so anxious that leading up to it, 3 days leading up to it, I feel horrible. And then 2 days afterwards, I feel horrible because I'm not happy with my performance, etc. That's where, we start noticing progress, like, maybe I did notice some anxiety come up, but it was more fleeting. And afterwards, I noticed a lot more self-compassion towards myself in terms of how thinking about the way I performed or whatever. So, yes, I think that emotional freedom, the way that I understand it, means we have a tool at our disposal that we can use when we feel triggered about something. But it's not. The other analogy that comes to mind is someone going to the gym. Let's say in this case with EFT, like we work on our emotions. And someone going to the gym is not like they're gonna go to the gym for 3 months and then never ever need to go to the gym again. It's kind of something that you have to keep doing if you wanna, keep your muscle strength. But that being said, someone who goes to the gym, if they need to lift, I don't know, their grocery bags, or they need to lift a TV or some sort of heavy object, compared to someone who doesn't go to the gym or who doesn't work out at all, they are gonna be like stronger to lift whatever needs to be lifted, right? So I think in that way, it's like, yes, EFT, I think it's something that I use it daily, or at least every if not daily, every 2 days, for sure. And I'm probably gonna need to keep doing that, for perhaps forever, or I don't know. But I do notice, like, it's great when you are going about your daily life and you find yourself thinking, oh, this thing that just happened, it used to really trigger me. It used to make me feel anxious or embarrassed or self-critical, etc. And now I'm not noticing that reaction anymore.
That's right.
And yeah, I feel more free in that, more emotionally free compared to before.
And also, I mean, that's not to say that other people who are thinking about doing EFT, nobody needs to be doing it every day or every other day or every week. I mean, we're practitioners and we choose to work like we work with one another as swap partners because we are choosing to use EFT to help us with our business goals, so it's very useful for that, isn't it? So like, I've tapped a lot on making reels and, you and I both tapped on making videos and here we are making a video. So
Yes.
everybody doesn't need to sort of keep at it and at it and at it, but we do because we like the freedom it gives us to go from feeling like that's not doable to now I'm doing it and it's not hard. So it's really,
Yes.
it's like a torch, isn't it? You can shine the torch on
Yeah.
whatever's happening in your life that provokes stress or anxiety and turn that down, reduce the reaction, reduce the intensity, and then things just feel more manageable, don't they?
Exactly. Like, for example, when it comes to my singing, there was I don't know, maybe like a month or so that I was tapping on it relatively frequently. And then eventually I stopped doing that because, I don't know, I became focused on other things. But now it's been several months since the last time I tapped on anything related to singing. And I find myself going to classes and not feeling triggered by receiving feedback from the teacher, from noticing like, oh, I didn't sing this part well enough, or I might have messed up this particular part of the song, no big deal. And what I tell my clients, I'm not a big fan of like tapping homework as something that you should like telling them you should do it. It's more like, if you want to do it, this is what I would recommend, like to keep it really simple. Especially something I like to tell them is, if you ever find yourself crying, for example, or like ruminating about something, like maybe you have a presentation at work and you find yourself coming up with scenarios, what if this happens, what if that happens, simply add silent tapping. Like, allow yourself to continue thinking what you were thinking and
Yeah,
feeling what you are feeling, but simply tap, silently, without necessarily having to do the even though I feel da da da.
that's right.
And I think that that's very doable. But I also say, if for whatever reason you prefer not to tap in between sessions, no worries. We can continue, with whatever frequency we work together, once a week, once every 2 weeks. That's also so I think basically, in my own experience with EFT, the more I was able to let go of perfectionism, even
Mm,
the idea of, yes, if you're gonna tap on something, you'd better bring it down to a 0. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Like, if I think like that, then I probably wouldn't tap at all, because I would be kind of a bit intimidated by that idea. Yes, we want to be as thorough as possible, especially when working with clients. But that being said, I think that some tapping is better than no tapping.
mm,
And the more we can not be like overwhelmed by um, an ideal way of how we are supposed to do EFT,
yeah,
the easier, the more accessible this tool is gonna be. It's gonna feel.
that's right. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Bruno. That's been really helpful to hear about your experience of it, both personally and professionally. So thanks very much for spending time with me today on that. And if you'd like to work with Bruno as a practitioner, he's available on the Clinical EFT Connect website that you can book that way, or he has his own private practice based in Argentina, and he's it's www.brunosad.com.
Sade, sad.com.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Bruno.
Yeah, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I look forward to speaking with you again, whenever our next appointment might be.
Okay, thanks, Bruno.